Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Archetypal Radio. Today, I will be discussing dreams and why they're important, how to utilize them for transformation. And this will be kind of an adjunct to an article that I just posted on my blog, mysticalrevival.com, which I'll link to in the show notes and also mention again at the end of this episode. But what I want to talk about today is that dreams are a really potent way to be able to basically get a sense of what we're not seeing. Uh, and if you're doing any sort of inner work or believe that that's important, it's kind of a central tenet of this podcast. It's kind of a central tenet of my own virtues, is to be able to, understand that you are not the be all sine qua non of existence, that this waking consciousness is very limited. And useful though it is, total identification with it tends to breed suffering for the individual and for society. And for me personally, dreams have been the vehicle by which I've come to understand the mystery of the psyche, or understand that there is a mystery to the psyche, because they're experiential. They happen every night. And once you take on, it's like with your own consciousness, if you align yourself to the highest good, whatever that may be, the highest good will itself manifest, and you'll be able to kind of make your own interpretations and find the true self, as Jung would say. So it's a journey of inner exploration, and that was always key for me because I was very, I am very discerning. I've always wanted to figure things out, know how things work, and find the little mechanisms. I was born to be a scientist and went through scientific training, and kind of became very entrenched in a materialist reductionist stance. And so for me, I needed to have something experiential that I could witness essentially. And so I'm going to describe to you today how that's unfolded for me. I will utilize three different dreams or dream arcs, because dream arcs are really important. They'll show you kind of the progression of whatever's going on within you, whatever wounds you might have, whatever healing you might be going through. Those actions and those progressions will manifest in your dreams as well. And arcs are a really good way to be able to get a measure of that. But I'll explain basically. I'll use these examples as a way to introduce the listener to the language that dreams speak in, because it is like learning another language. It's learning a symbolic language. It's learning a symbolic language. Of course, all languages are symbolic, but the language of the psyche is at its core symbols that are always changing. There's certain motifs and things that we'll get into the nitty gritty of that, but certain energies, certain complexes, certain elements tend to get embodied in a number of symbols. But of course, whatever the symbol is going to depend upon the context in which it appears, i.e., however it's appearing within the dreamer's psyche, the dreamer's dream. So a horse is not going to be a catch-all term for masculine potency or the strength of your animal instincts. There will always be some sort of relation to that, but however it's appearing is going to be different because whoever's having it has had a completely different experience, line of experiences, line of ancestry, all of that. So we'll get into that. So I'll bring y'all to where my dream journey began. Of course, there's always dreams that we kind of remember from early childhood. There will be ones that kind of stay with us. There were three big dreams that stayed with me prior to the age of 24, which is when my dream life started exploding. I'm not going to go into those. One, because they're deeply personal, and they don't really fall within the realm of this discussion. Of course, the symbolic language is all there, but just for conciseness sake, we're going to leave those out. But for one, you've had some dreams that you can start to apply this symbolic interpretation to. and starting that conversation with the unconscious, saying, okay, now I believe that you have something to show me that I should learn, is going to instigate a process in which the unconscious will begin to speak again. And of course, it's always doing this, but the more open we're allowing that connection to be, the the more towards wholeness we'll be moving, or the more whole we will be striving for. Um, so initiating that conversation with the unconscious. And yeah, it's never a linear process. I remember as a young man, I did as a senior in high school, took a psychology class, AP psychology class, and our instructor had us do a dream journal. And we did this for 2 weeks. And during that duration, I remembered 13 out of 14 nights of dreams. I would remember a narrative each night, and they were pretty random. I don't really remember any of the ones that I had then, except like one very strange fragment. Um, and so it kind of depends on where you're at. And whenever you're taking this journey, it may or may not instigate. It may take more time. That you may not quite be ready yet, or there may be, you might have some work to do on the ego strength side, but it'll happen when it's supposed to happen. And for when it happened for me was when I was 25. I was going through a major life transition. I had just split up with a partner with whom I'd been with for 4.5 years. And being 25, that was a pretty big rock in the boat for me. I was also working at a job that I enjoyed, but it was taking a lot from me in ways that I didn't understand. And I was about to lose my job there. And I also started seeing a Jungian inclined psychotherapist at this time too. And so I was kind of in a ripe position. I was in a phase of dissolution, right? I was letting go of these identity markers, i.e., the identity that I had attached to my relationship, the identity that I had tied to my job, and the people that I worked with, and all of that was fading away. And then I happened to also be seeing this therapist, this depth psychologist, and the first dream that I had after seeing him, and I had this first dream 2 weeks after I started seeing this therapist, I refer to as the Dark Tower dream. And this is going to get into a wide panacea of things. Of course, if you're using this as an adjunct to the article, it's going to be a little broader than what the article specifies, but you are going to get the kind of sense of how to drop into the dream world and how to understand the language. Basically, by using, I'm going to articulate my subjective experience and utilize that as a metric. Of course, you can't use my subjective experience. You'll have to learn how to apply this to your own experience, but that'll come with time. So yeah, I had this dream 2 weeks after I started seeing this therapist. And the dream was of a dark tower. It was, and I'll give the full narrative and then I'll kind of go back through and explain what's going on. So since this is the first dream, this one is really imperative for me. This is one that I always kind of return back to, and I draw new associations. I learn new things about it. So to give some pretext, this dream was showing me it was showing me the core complex that I was suffering from. And it gives an indication to what Bill Plotkin refers to as a mythopoetic identity or an ecological niche. And I'll delve into that as we go through, but essentially like the role that I'm meant to serve in this world as this incarnation. And so I come in, I'm a floating point of perspective floating above this tower. For those of you that are familiar with Lord of the Rings, it looks very similar to Orthanc, not exactly like it, but it has this kind of shape to it. And definitely these four spikes up at the top. This looks identical, not quite so thorny, but so I'm a floating point of perspective coming in, flying over this tower. And filled with kind of an ominous sense of dread. Um, Before I know it, the dream shifts very suddenly. I'm now in my body, standing at the top of this tower in the very like balcony around this area. And it's made of black stone. There's big open windows. It's quite looks quite ornate and like there was some serious mason work done there. And I can see that there's the doors out onto the balcony are open, and there's wind, and there's kind of these red drapes that are flowing. And as I go closer to the balcony, I see the body of my ex-partner, and I know for a fact that there are three others laying beside her, all men, and they're all lying in a pool of blood. They've all been murdered. Um, and I'm horrified, and I step back, and I'm too horrified to even step further out onto the balcony to see the other victims. I'm in shock, and I can't look at it. And then the dream shifts another time, this last final time, and now I'm up at the very top up here, and I'm sitting with I'm at a banquet table with everyone that I know. Um, all my friends, and those that are sitting close to me are the people that I know the best. And I'm sitting there, and I'm aware of the fact that my ex-partner has just been murdered and found in this very tower. Um, and I'm very overwhelmed by this, and I start to cry. Um, and of course, I want so desperately to talk to someone about this. All these people that are very close to me, I can't reveal this intimate detail to. I can't say my ex-partner just died in this tower, and I'm having trouble dealing with that. And so as I start to cry, I put my hands up over my face like this and cry into my hands. And no one notices that I'm crying. Um, and that's where the dream ends. And so we're going to go back through it and review the kind of the symbols that are approaching, that are appearing. So the tower is of course that's the first thing that comes in. There's nothing else. I'm not even embodied when I see it, first witness it, right? So it's really focusing my attention on this tower, and this tower is representative of my neurosis, is what Jung would say, or my complex. And there is some literature that talks about the citadel complex. It's very similar, very guarded, right? But the tower is a way to get very high very quickly, essentially. And this is why it tends to be kind of associated with the intellect, or with this thinking consciousness, with the ego. And the shadow element of this consciousness is that it tries to equal the height of God, one might say. And it tries to find the quickest way to salvation, essentially, how it can go up, 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 up. And the thing is, it tends not to dig down deep, right, and develop roots. And this is why in the stories like the Tower of Babel, um, that it falls, right? It can't support its own weight. And if you're stuck in your head all the time, um, then that can kind of be the representation. You get stuck up in your tower, at the very tippy top of your tower, and you don't feel the rest of your body. You don't feel your anger. You don't feel. So for me, someone that was very kind of like white knight, think I'm the best, right? Think that I'm just so good and holy. There's this big shadow side of me, and it doesn't dig down deep, and it's in danger of collapsing. And not only that, now who's at the very top of it, right, or now been killed as a result. And the result is that it results in total death. So the appearance of the four is very interesting. This is a motif that appears throughout my dreams and throughout dreams of people that I've spoken to. And the quaternity is the squaring of the circle, or it's the representation of wholeness within a finite system. And so what this is speaking to is the death of my total personality, my total identification with this element. Um, And of course, that one of them is my partner. That same motif operates as well. That it's one woman, three men. That appears to be the makeup of my psyche, if you will. Um, but the death of my soul, my anima, the unconscious aspects of me, the other elements of me, all dead and bathed in blood. Um, and a kind of sense that this was performed by the tower in the dream as well. So it's this kind of high and mightiness, if you will, that is kind of destroying me and killing my relationships, killing my relationship to myself, relationship to my partner, relationship to my family, relationship to everyone that I know. Uh, that's the consequence of the banquet table. Everyone I know, I'm cut off from. They can't even perceive the fact that I am mourning the biggest thing that's ever happened to me, the death of my partner, and witnessing this horrible crime. And I won't let them do that. I hide behind my hands. I don't. I'm crying out for help, crying out for help, but don't want to say anything. Don't want to communicate that because then it would deteriorate this image I have of being the mighty tower, of being this kind of intellectual giant, and very, very inflated. Was totally unaware of that. Now I'm more aware of it. Still like getting up in the tower quite a bit, but this is the kind of first indication, right? And I say mythopoetic identity, and why I bring that in because I think in very magical terms, I think there's a lot of validity to thinking in magical terms, and that if you bridge that side with the intellect, um, that it can do really miraculous things. And those are the kind of two elements of our consciousness: the very magical side. Causality is not a thing, versus the physical plane. We are bound to some degree by causality and by flow of events, right? But that neither of them alone is right, because there's always different ways of looking at things. But when you bridge them together, then that tends to achieve some sort of synthesis that is not only healing for individuals, but can be really healing for society as well, because that leads us to have some degree of right humility towards the mystery of what is, instead of thinking that we just know everything. So this is a complex that's pretty culturally embedded as well. And you can kind of see, I mean, all of this shit is tied together, right? It's not just that it's like, oh, it's a tower, it's phallic, right? It's this big erect thing. That's those are the two are intertwined, right? It's like bees and flowers. It is this masculine, outgoing consciousness that is so unitary that it's trying to strive to heaven without actually developing its base, or without ever developing its base, right? And this is the reason why it falls, because it has so insubstantial a base. It just wants to get there. It wants to get there quick, because time is an ego thing, right? So that's the first dream. And yeah, with regards to how this affected me, this magical side, very much consider myself, a modern wizard. And I don't mean that to be like a title of grandeur or anything like that. I think it's really just, again, being someone that humbles himself to the mystery of the psyche, that goes out and really strives to learn, because I'm never going to want to stop studying. I'm never going to want to stop reading. At least I don't think any time in the next 20 years, I mean, priorities might shift over that period of time, right? But I've always been fascinated by the world, ever since ever since I had an ego consciousness to be able to remember things with. Um, I've been in love with it, and I want to know it, and I want to know how it works, and all of the little minutia that help to make it go along. But of course, the more that you learn, the more that you realize that there is things that you will never understand, that will never will even be able to be exposed to. Um, Partially because we're limited in our time. There's just so much to learn, right? That even that which has already been discovered is too much for one intellect. And this is kind of the power of story as well, because story can really condense these things down into the understanding, and that's the bridge between this kind of discerning, outgoing physical consciousness versus the kind of ethereal, bringing together relationship element that the masculine and feminine is what some people refer to it as. That's what I like to refer to it as because I think it makes sense. These polarities and how they go into one another and out of one another and into one another. But yeah, I'm a wizard, right? I found a staff very shortly before my Saturn return, after my therapist, who I am still working with, instructed me to go out and find one, and I found it in this valley that was very sacred to me. I'll probably talk sometime about the mystery of that valley and why it's been so important to me, but there was this staff that was perfect for me, and I took it, and it's over there and stained and everything. So this is kind of revealing to me, right, that this is what you're meant to do, but you're becoming Saruman instead of Gandalf the White, right? And the fact that it looks so similar to this tower is not accidental. That's something that if you read the article, I'll just reiterate them all again, is that everything in the dream is you. Every image is some element of you. The elements are never accidental, i.e., there's weird things that happen in dreams, and it's very intentional and meant to, not intentional as like there's this like sort of ethereal, like, I mean, you could think of it that way. I like to think of it as like a giant spider that sits above me as I sleep and weaves these dream narratives for me. That's how I conceive of it. But the idea is that because you are this light, right? You are this sun of consciousness, of light, that light cannot look at itself, right? Because it is the thing which brings light. So, with that in mind, the dream itself is a direct reflection of that. Um, and Jung actually says that the ego is the more or less continuous personification or projection of the unconscious for this very reason. So whatever is happening in waking life, that is going to have a direct consequence for the night life, the unconscious side of us when we go unconscious, right? Because we don't stay conscious all the time. For most people, at least 6 hours, hopefully somewhere between 7 and 8, you're unconscious and you're in the dream world. And that dream world is a reflection of what is happening in your conscious life, not as a sort of like mystical quasi, like, like, the dream weaver is like weaving this for you but no, as it can't happen any other way sort of way, as the fact that the sun's light, if it has nothing to reflect off of, cannot be seen, right? So I know I'm getting off on tangents here. I can't. I'm getting excited. So this is not accidental, right? This is what I'm trying to drive home with Saruman's tower, is that because Saruman is a wizard, he's a dark wizard, right? He's a wizard that loses his connection to nature, to the feminine, to the mystery, and whenever you first meet him in the Fellowship of the Ring, in the movies that most people have seen, his tower is surrounded by lushness and by flowers and gardens and birds and animals. And this is why, of course, in the sequel to Two Towers, the Ents revolt against him because he's torn everything down. Because the old world will burn in the fires of industry, and he completely loses his respect for that. He's someone that used to walk in the woods with Treebird, but now he's up in his tower. And this was kind of the journey that I was going to have to go on. This kind of a reconnection to the feminine for me that had already kind of started to happen as I had been spending time out in this sacred valley for quite some time, from the time I was, let's see, 23, ages about 23 to 25. I spent multiple hours a week in this valley, and came to know it very well. And so I was already kind of doing this, but this was the big dream. That really kind of like shook me and made me realize that there is something far more mysterious and just far too fascinating to look away from. Second series of dreams that we'll go through is again just a way to kind of look at symbolic interpretation, to understand like how it is that the dreams are speaking to you, um, and right, incorporating all of these rules that nothing is accidental, everything is a reflection of what happens in waking consciousness, um, especially the things that you don't want to look at or don't want to acknowledge. And so this was related to kind of my sexual healing. I grew up Catholic and always had a lot of fear around sexuality. Thought it was really bad. Was terrified of it, and so I developed kind of a shadow of sexuality, and shadow sexuality very um, very again kind of tower-ish, like very up in my tower, mostly with pornography and like not having actual connections with human women or with humans at all. And so yeah, again, all interrelated. So this dream takes place. I was following. I was in the parents' house of my ex partner, who I mentioned earlier, um, and I was following this woman, and she was my anima image at the time. And she was leading me through this house, and this is something that the anima tends to do, is to lead you places. And this is if you're masculine identified like myself. You're if you're masculine identified, then other is going to be personified in the feminine, i.e. the feminine is the gateway to your other, the gateway to your unconscious, because unconscious is also other, right? It's that which we perceive not to be ourself, but we are the totality. We are integral to everything that goes on in this universe, whether you believe that this is a simulation, whether you believe that it's just a system that obeys laws. I think you need to do a little bit more digging if that's your conception. But Anima's leading me around this house, my ex-partner's house, and she leads me to this room, and then it transforms into my best friend's house from when we were kids. And there's similarities there, right? Like both my ex-partner and my best friend are only children. Both were pretty repressing on sexuality, and they were both very intimately connected with me, right? And that's platonically, that's erotically, right? But she leads me to this side of the room. She leads me to the side of the house, and it transforms into it transforms into the house of my best friend when we were kids. And we're about like 14 in this particular stage of the dream. And this is just it's just so wonderful because like every time I come back and like look at these dreams, there's always new things that come up. But we're looking into his parents' bedroom, right? Where there was any sexuality that was occurring in the house, right? um, and we're looking in there, and there's these three big like ogre things, and they're like paste white, right? They're like just as white as the ceiling here. They're just white, and they have no faces, kind of like this, but even more pronounced. Like I wouldn't even say that there was a nose. It was just kind of a flat face. Just a flat, yeah, like an egg, essentially. But they're huge. They're like 9 feet fucking tall. They're, gorilla sized musculature. They're just massive beings. And they also have enormous dicks. Like I'm talking like, the size of like my forearm here. Just massive. And there's these three sets of kind of like mannequin legs up to the waist that walk in, right? They're these like lower halves of female bodies. And the ogres just take that as their cue, and they just start ramming them, just like really giving it to them, just like pile drive, like yeah, violent. And my best friend and I are like watching all this happen, and we're kind of like giggling. Um, and then the dream shifts to this kind of like music festival. I'm like up on a hill, and there's a stage down there, and there's all of these people, and I see my anima image with a good friend of mine who I admire and respect quite a lot, and who I have like more than my fair share of envy and jealousy towards, because he is a very successful guy, and kind of channels this energy a lot better than I do. And I see her sitting with him, and that's where the dream ends. And so, kind of going back through, looking at each looking at each element of the dream. So the location's important, right? It takes place the in the houses of childhood homes of two people who are very close to me, right? My ex-partner and my best friend, who I'm still best friends with. We've known each other for 25 years. And there's the element of repression. My ex-partner's family was not like, nothing crazy, but certainly wasn't very, they never talked to her about sex. They were repressed in themselves, I'm sure. And with my best friend's parents, but some degree of that too. And definitely, we were both raised, and we were all three raised in kind of Christian traditions. But there's that repression of sexuality. There's that parental, like, no, I don't want to talk about this. It's uncomfortable. I don't like the idea of my child being a sexual being, even though we are born that way. And so there's that kind of like that pressure, right? And but there's right our as the dream transform, as my anima leads me to this scene, she's telling me what to look at, right? Um, she Then the scene shifts where kind of our younger selves were like 14, 15, and it's like watching pornography when you're young together and you're kind of like first exploring it together. We'd actually never did this as adolescents, and in fact, my relationship with my best friend has always been one where we kind of don't really talk about who we're interested in, or what is going on for us sexually, right? Especially as we were growing up, probably due to a lot of this kind of parental suppression, and fear and shame around sexuality. And so we're kind of like, but we're interested in it. And I remember even as kids, like we liked to play in there a lot, and their parents would let us play in there a lot. But there was something that like really drew us in there, that we liked about being in that room. And of course, that's where they would have been having sex, right? And and even like talking about it right now, I can feel my inner child like maybe that's where they had sex, but it's like, yeah, that's where they were having sex, right? Anyway, so we're kind of looking in there with this interested eye, and we're kind of like giggling like schoolboys looking at porn for the first time. And that's what's very interesting about this kind of imagery, right? Is that it's very depersonified. It's not human. It's ogreish. It's monstrous, and the female figures that it is fucking, right? That is just kind of pile driving this mechanical action, right? Um, they're not even full women. They're just the parts essentially that are necessary and convenient to have sex with, right? It's just like, but it's very mechanical. It's very kind of what pornography can be. And not that there isn't good pornography out there, right? That is connected and embraces like a more wholesome sexuality, but pornography and how it's used in the first world, I would say that this is definitely indicative. It's depersonified. It's not spiritual. It's not love. There's no love. It's just pure mechanical, monstrous animal lust, right? Um, and nothing wrong with going out and like having like a fling, right? And like having a very passionate fling, but there's something else that's wrapped up in that. It's not just mechanical like this. This is the pickup culture. This is I mean, this is kind of what the psyche is trying to say. And of course, it's showing me too that up on this hill, again, I'm placing myself above all of these people. And it's in this setting that's supposed to be very, like connected. Like people go to festivals and they're like, oh, this is so great. We can just like be on drugs and we can dance and we can have sex and like, we can all be together like this. And I'm up there alone without, I'm on my blanket alone, seeing my anima attracted to this man who has his sexual energies more aligned, who has his professional interests more in line, who is doing the work of the world more in line. And I'm growing jealous and I want to kill him. And that's the Cain part of me, right? That's the part of me that says like, well, it has nothing to do with me that the anima is not attracted to me, or that this woman that I want isn't attracted to me. It's that he's somehow, that I have to get my revenge on him. I don't know what he did, but he definitely didn't do it fairly. That's the sort of like thing that it's kind of pointing out, that shadowy side. Um, and so I had this stream, I would say probably early 2020, right before the pandemic. And several months later, closer to September, October, I had another dream in which these ogre figures reappeared, but this time as a like much different, much more humanized guys. And so I'll go into the interpretation of that. And so in this stream, I'm now a floating point of perspective in a bedroom. Kind of looks like the bedroom that I just inhabit. Um, and there are three different people. There's this very tall, very beautiful, muscular, long-haired Samoan man, also with quite an enormous penis, but not nearly as cartoonish as the ogres were in the previous stream. A little bit more realistic, still, kind of like maybe like Mandingo length. So there's him. There's a woman that he's having sex with. I don't really see her face much. I can kind of see she has like um, red hair that could be related to my current anima image, though I'm not quite sure. And um, he's having sex with her. And there's also this really ugly fat guy. And he's the one that looks like the ogre. He's like really, really big. He's got the same shoulders as the ogre, but he's got hair. He's really hairy on his back, and he's just kind of like laying there on the bed naked with his face down, right? All while the Samoan man and the woman are having sex. And this was much more focused on them because I get the most detail from Samoan man, a little bit of detail from the woman he's having sex with, and slightly more detail on the ogre that's lying down. And then the scene shifts, woman disappears entirely, right? And now the Samoan man goes over to the big fat ogre guy and he starts having sex with him anally. And just like really, really deep, really slow, seems passionate. The ogre guy is like not really responding at all. He's just kind of laying there. So there's like that element to it. But we'll come back to the Samoan man and that image because that's very important. The dream shifts, and I'm now on a big open beach. It's cloudy, and I'm there with a big group of people. And all the men, I'm like the smallest man out of this group. It's a co-ed group of about the same number of men and women. And these guys are just all like beautiful, huge, jacked, muscular, right? All that stuff. And we're all kind of together on this beach. And there's other people around. There's like seagulls and like big green mountains. And they say hey, we're gonna have a something style orgy. And I forget the exact word that he used, but I asked for clarification in the dream, and I said, does that mean that it's going to be primarily male male? And he says, yes, that's the idea. And I say, that sounds great. You guys go do that. That sounds wonderful for you. I'm going to stay over here with the ladies. This is what I do in the dream. Um, And I start getting friendly with this lovely black girl. She's half naked and getting more naked, and we're having a good time when these two lifeguards come over. And at first, I think to myself, like the lifeguards are going to be like you can't, you like you like you can't be here, right? But actually, they're quite positive as well. They come in, the authorities, right, and they say, "You guys are going to have to go somewhere else. There's a storm coming in, and it's going to be really gnarly." And so we thank them and say, "Okay, thank you." And I look out, so I go to the shore. I go over to the water where the tide's coming in, and I see that there's this kind of like shed, this like little house almost, if you will. It's a little square house that's just like floating and coming in and out with the tide and getting further and further out. And for whatever reason in my mind, I associate this. I associate this. This house as being 16 by 16 by 16, its dimensions. And there's also 16 people that are surrounding it, trying to trying to get this person out. There's like a window that you can see, but you can't see if anyone's in there. But they're all like very concerned trying to get someone out. I'm gonna return to that too because that's interesting as shit. The squaring of the square, that kind of thing. So there's someone trapped in a box that they can't get out of on the shore. There's people trying to help get them out. And he feels like a he, so I'll keep calling him he, trying to get him out. And as I look over to the left, I see just tons and tons and tons of grizzly bears, like seals. Like they're like laying on the rocks like seals, but they're grizzly bears, and they're like all out in the water too. There's got to be at least 100 grizzly bears out there. And so I refer affectionately to this dream as the bear storm dream. Um, and there's a lot in this one too. So that's where the dream ends. I'll kind of start going back through and again interpreting the symbols as they come up. But so yeah, very beginning, bedroom, right, intimate, more connected, and the Samoan man, he walks both sides, right? He has sex with a woman. He appears to be bisexual, right? Um, and he's not afraid to go really deep into what I perceive to be grotesque, right? I look at this big 300-pound hairy ogre guy, and with who has kind of like a messy asshole. Now that I recall, he has kind of like these weird bits, like almost looks like afterbirth or something like that, but just kind of like a gross butt, right? And um, the Samoan man has no reticence. He goes really deep. He goes really deep in the grotesque, right? And seems to enjoy it. So he's representing that element of me that I've disowned. So he kind of has that kind of like shadowiness to him, right? He's darker skinned. He has long hair, but he's beautiful. He's gorgeous, right? And yeah, embraces both sides of his sexual nature. His it's all penetrative, right? He's penetrating the feminine, he's penetrating the masculine, and penetrating the grotesque. Um, there's not really that receptive side of him, but that's the masculine outgoing side, right? And then these two representing the receiving or the unseen or that which we perceive to be grotesque as not us, right? And so him and I have had some conversations too. You can engage with people outside of your dreams and waking life through active imagination, just talking to them and being unattached to the outcome. But he's an interesting figure, very divine, masculine, right? Strength, authority, confidence, um, confidence in the face of uh, socially unaccepted behaviors, perhaps. And so the dream shifts, and there's this bear storm. I think the men are kind of related to the bear in that way, and the bear is a very like potent sexual symbol, and would be in this context because it's a sexual dream. Um, And again, like there's this element of like my ego is very accepting of others, of other sexuality, of other male sexuality, but is one that I'm still kind of like grappling with, but obviously more than content to hang out with the feminine, and the feminine is more than content to hang out with me. We have a good time out there, and she's a black girl too, so there is some element of like engaging with the shadowy element. And so we can talk about like I think that as a result of the last 300 400 years, that that in my psyche black people are representative of other, or representative of shadow traits. And this is this is my a representation of my ego like merging with that and wanting to play with that side of myself, right? Again, this is everything in the dream is related to you. That's kind of it. It's not a hard and fast rule of like this is truth, and I mean I believe that's true for everything, but it's more of just like a practicality guideline. But of course, it's all interrelated. It's not just you. You are part of a social system, which is part of a global system, right? So parts of the collective psyche are going to be within you, just as a, as an inevitability. Um, so there is that collective content there that is embedded within me, right? But we're enjoying each other. And then the lifeguards, who I think are going to, say, this is bad. You guys shouldn't be doing this. They come by and are actually just concerned for our safety because there is a storm coming. And so, right, again, going back to nothing is accidental, the fact that I think that they're going to chastise us, right, is indicative of what I think the authorities would do. Or like, no, you shouldn't be doing that. This is bad, all that stuff. But this is the good authority. Like, hey, there's a goddamn storm coming. You guys should, get somewhere safe and then have your orgy, right? Um, and so, it's a good point. They listen. I, however, go towards the storm. I go towards the sea, and I see this box 16 by 16 by 16 with 16 people trying to rescue the individual inside. So again, there's that element of being cut off, of being trapped, and now being left to wash adrift in a house that I cannot get out from, on the ocean in the storm. Yikes. And then at 16, and the 16 appears 4 times, right? So there's the quaternity there. That 16 is 4 by 4. It's kind of crazy, really, when you think about it. But this is the also the number of Brigid, who is a goddess in the Celtic tradition, who was Christianized to Saint Brigid, right? Um, I did some digging on her quite some time ago and felt like I was trying to get in communication with her. She may be like a guardian goddess of mine, but I don't really, I'm not motivated enough to like make effigies or devote altar work to her. Something I could probably do and probably benefit from, but hey, I'm still kind of in my tower, right? Um, but there's this storm of bears, and bears, again, they're tied to sexuality from the dream, but they're also separate. Um, there's also a separate meaning. And bears and storms, right? This is the relationship, that it's not just a storm, it's not just a bear, it's a bear storm. Storms always precede, they're always very chaotic, right? They shake things up. Bad storms, come through cities, and the city has to lock down. There's always going to be some level of disaster. People are going to die. Dam Property is going to be lost. Damage is going to ensue. It's going to rock things up. Storms always do that. And that it consists of these bears. Two bears are, they are top predators. They are devourers. They rip things apart. They will dismember and disembowel you. And I did mention this in the earlier description of the dream, but they all look at me. They're all looking at me, and some of them even start walking closer to me and are looking quite hungry. And I turn tail and run away. Kind of like running away from my dissolution, my ego dissolution. And it is interesting because this dream, by several months, preceded another kind of like major upheaval, the breakup of a major relationship in my life. And whether that's related or not, I always think that there's some sort of, I think that dreams have a predictory capacity as well. Because again, the dream, the unconscious knows things that you do not. It knows quite a lot actually, and it's not like us in that it can like pull these things up and be like, I know this, I know this, I know this. Um, Grass is green because of chlorophyll. Your your stomach releases hydrochloric acid to activate pepsinogen so that you can digest proteins, right? It's not that kind of knowledge. It's just like it is, that it is, right? And so that's not the main point I want to make, but of course, dreams can have that capacity. But it's pointing at this sort of dissolution that's going to happen, and the need for it, and my propensity to run away. That's pretty obvious. Ego doesn't like getting torn apart. It's kind of painful, uh, but it's something that needs to happen. And so I wanted to share the progression of these dreams because they they kind of show this movement from, you know, this kind of depersonified, pornographic, masturbatory relationship to sex and lead more to one where it's more relative, where there's more relationship, where there's more passion, where there's more personality. And of course, there's the elements of like exposing me to my shadow, this bisexual, beautiful Samoan man, strong and able to probe that which I perceive to be grotesque. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the introduction to dream interpretation. I'll probably be giving some more talks on this, and of course, I'm going to review this and edit it and see how I feel about it. But that's your kind of introduction to being able to start speaking the symbolic language of your dreams. And again, don't take these interpretations and be like, okay, well, the host said that the bear represents sexuality in his dream, so therefore I had a dream about a bear, and therefore it's saying something about my sexuality. It may not be saying anything about your sexuality. I have no idea. Um, and that's the idea, is that you want to be able to look at your own experience, apply this to your own experience, understand that your own experience has actually helped to shape the dream that you are now having and now analyzing, and be able to make those interpretations for yourself. And that's what's going to open up your communication with the unconscious. That's what's going to enrich your dream life. And that's what's going to allow you to kind of like be able to look at the spots that you don't normally look at, because we're always trying to do this work with the consciousness, with the ego that we're trying to change, and that is circuitous and hard and doesn't really get us anywhere. But if you're like me and you're like, what the fuck else am I going to do? I don't know how to be any other way. Then dreams offer a really great representation of that, because they are something that comes from part of us that is not conscious, i.e., we have them when we're unconscious. That's the whole idea. All of this is related, nothing is accidental. Um, so, yeah, get dreaming, start looking at your shit like it's got something to say. Um, and yeah, check out the fucking website, motherfuckers. Mysticalrevival.com, MYSTICAL REVIVAL.com. Yeah, thanks for listening, y'all.